And now please welcome back Marc Pritchard, Chief Brand Officer of P&G, to introduce our next conversation.
Well, thank you, John. After 13 hours of interviews, as you said, we're rounding third and headed for home, and you're allowing me to do another guest conversation with Marc Allen. And Marc Allen is the Chief Strategy Officer and Senior Vice President of Strategy and Corporate Development at the Boeing Company, which is the world's largest aerospace company and one of the largest U.S. exporters. Now, in this role, Marc is responsible for the company's overarching strategy, including long-term planning, global business and corporate development, as well as strategic investments, acquisitions, and divestitures. He's been with Boeing since 2007, serving previously as President of Boeing International, President of Boeing Capital Corporation, President of Boeing China, and before that as General Counsel and in Global Law Affairs working on international policy matters. So Marc has outside of Boeing, beyond that, he also sits on numerous global organizations, including P&G's board, and is an Aspen Institute Henry Crown Fellow and member of the Council on Foreign Relations. So Marc, thank you for coming to Signal. Welcome to the P&G board, and welcome to Signal and taking some time with us today.
I'm really glad to be here, Marc. Thank you for the invitation, and it's great to have this chance.
Yeah, it's great. Got it. So, hey, listen, let's start with the year that was, which is the pandemic. You know, it's been kind of an amazing situation and hard on many industries, and clearly the aviation industry was one that had some major disruption. Tell us a little bit about how it affected the aviation industry, Boeing in particular, how the pandemic affected it, and then what lessons did you learn about how to survive and navigate?
Well, this has been an extreme year. It's been extremely difficult. There have been a lot of industries badly impacted, but certainly air travel was right at the forefront of that, Marc. The most difficult moments, air travel had come to nearly a complete stop globally. Demand was down 94% in April 2020. So it was quite a shock to the company and to the broader aviation system. The good news, of course, is that as with all the world, recovery has been underway. Science, vaccines, protocols, mass quarantines have all been put in place with a lot of rigor and attention globally, internationally, by many governments. And so our business has been able to ride along with the recovery wave, as it were. We just saw over the July 4th weekend here in the United States, for the first time, domestic travel figures were back at or above the levels they were on the same day in 2019. Pre-pandemic. So that's a terrific milestone of recovery. There's still a long way to go. International travel, as I expect you well know, remains at between a 15 to 25% rate of those same day 2019 levels. So there's a lot of continued recovery ahead of us that we'll all be working on. And we are all encouraging our governments to connect, to work together collectively, to put in place protocols and frameworks that can allow the world to open back up. In terms of what we learned as a company going through this, we did this, Marc, on the back of a prior crisis, the MAX crisis, which was a very difficult time for the company. And so it was really about two existential moments coming together. And if I could think about sort of what mattered most, it was about coming back down to the core of our purpose, what we believe in, our values and our commitment to one another and to the mission of this industry. So just to give you a few examples, we find a lot of purpose in Boeing in the role we take and play to protect the traveling public and passengers, military men and women that use our products all over the world. That sense of protection is really important to us. And the connection that our products enable globally matters to us. And so as a result, when COVID arrived, we jumped right in very actively with an initiative that was titled the Confident Travel Initiative, in which we really rallied together with industrial counterparts in aerospace, with universities, with governments around the world to tell the full story about why the public should have great confidence in air travel. Yeah, the data is remarkable, but frankly, being on an airplane is probably the safest place you could find yourself in a pandemic. The air is entirely exchanged. The entire cabin's air is exchanged in 2 to 3 minutes. The HEPA filters are, of course, hospital quality. And we have seen about 1.5 billion people fly since the pandemic started, over 60 million flights. And across a lot of governments and CDC equivalents around the world, all agree that there seem to be something in the neighborhood of 60 potential cases of transmission.
Wow.
So, being able to bring the science together, being able to bring the industry together to tell that story and to show our customers, both airlines and traveling public, how much confidence they could have in travel was, I think, for us as a company, a really encouraging way to rally. It helped all of us have confidence in the moment, and we need confidence in these moments. So I think finding that core purpose, standing on it, and building confidence from it is a really important part of responding to crisis.
And it's really remarkable that the industry and Boeing's leadership, came together to really create confidence in air travel, which could have been that 94% decline. That's a 6 index, the way we call about that. We don't hear about that very much, but recovering from that does require some extraordinary collaboration and education too. And I think that the airline industry really did do an amazing job of helping people get confidence. And I think it's testimony to the recovery that you've got. And speaking of collaboration, talk about innovation a little bit in the aviation, the aerospace industry. Because I remember we talked earlier. You talked about, there's a handful of manufacturers and thousands of suppliers, long lead times, but there's kind of an approach to innovation that you take that is, obviously the company does a lot of things, but there's a lot of partnership, a lot of collaboration, and tell us a little bit about that, including maybe if you can shine a light a little bit on the ventures organization that you run.
Sure. I love that you lead into it with collaboration, because that's at the very heartbeat of the innovation that we do. It is such an integrated industry. It takes 4 million parts to make a 747. And so if you talk about innovation in an airplane product like that, think about all the suppliers, all the systems designers that you touch that have to be a part of it. We tend to really think about the world between the innovation that's part of continuous improvement around our product competitiveness, the innovation that is a leapfrog change in one of our core business elements, and then the real disruptive horizons to our business. And that's where the ventures portfolio lives. Just a couple of quick examples on the first two, and then I'll talk about ventures. On the first, the continuous improvement is it is a constant exercise of searching for where in the design system, the production system, or the service and support system we can increase the efficiency and value we give to our customers. That's the name of the game. And so we're engaged in a regular conversation within our four walls, with suppliers, with universities who are in aerospace research themselves, looking for those places of incremental improvement. In the leapfrog, it tends to be platform development focused. So when we have a new airplane coming forward, whether it's a military or a commercial jet, we tend to think, what are the opportunities to redesign the system, the design system, the production system, the service and support system? And so, for example, we recently have developed and launched a product in the military training business called the ET7A Red Hawk. It's a jet trainer for Air Force pilots. It is recognized by the U.S. Air Force as the first quote-unquote airplane, meaning the design was entirely digital design, which was for us leapfrog transformation, innovation in how we design and then build. We took 80% of the assembly time out of the product from prior generation products. We reduced the software development time by about 50%. So really radical changes that we were able to achieve because of that, and because we were focused on designing around the whole development system. But our ventures work, which I have a lot of fun with, sits at the horizon and really thinks about not just what will disrupt the product category, but what's disrupting the entire mobility industry. And we can see this disruption happening across mobility on the ground. It's pretty obvious what first happened with the use, obviously, of the Ubers and Lyfts to reconfigure the availability of the mobility options. But also we see it in the electrical approach. We see electric vehicles radically transforming what will be offered in 5 or 10 years by all the car companies. And it's no different in our business. So advanced air mobility, or AAM as we call it, is a big part of our portfolio. It's focused on building electric, autonomous vehicles that can be used for urban mobility. And that innovation is requiring us to adopt a tethered open innovation system where we don't try to do all the innovation inside our 4 walls. We often work in partnership. For example, we have a joint venture with Larry Page and his company Kitty Hawk, in which we are developing a product, Cora X, which will meet this mission. We're doing that outside our 4 walls. A lot of Boeing engineers are involved. A lot of our certification expertise will be central to their success. But we are tapping into the best of Silicon Valley by doing it outside our 4 walls, and that's helping us with speed and agility. So we have these different models of innovation for different places where we're trying to change the game in our industry, and we try to be intentional about which model we're in at which point.
Wow, I mean, that's pretty extraordinary, and I'm glad you're on our board so you can help us think about new ways for us to innovate, because just cutting time from the innovation process, different ways of thinking about real breakthroughs as well as continuous improvement. So thanks for that. You mentioned electric, and it kind of triggered for me the thought of you're in the aviation industry. There's a lot of energy used, and that has an effect on the environment. And so how are you all thinking about innovation in the environment, and what is Boeing's role in environmental sustainability, and what are you doing about that?
Well, conserving this world is a priority for all of us. Aviation represents about 2% of emissions, and we take very seriously our responsibility to do our part on that 2%. We have historically been very effective moving from product to product, reducing emissions. So if you look at our last series of airplane introductions, you'll find basically a 20% decrease in emissions with each next generation. So when we build our sustainability strategy, that's where we start. Where we talk about 4 pillars. The first pillar is fleet renewal, because as airlines buy new designed airplanes, we're radically reducing the level of emissions that are being put into the air through aviation. The second pillar is about infrastructure. And infrastructure in our terms means things like air traffic control. Can your airplane take a continuous descent as opposed to a step-down descent? That radically changes how much fuel it burns. Our third pillar is sustainable aviation fuels. And since 2008, we've been pioneering the production and use of sustainable aviation fuels, which is built itself off of a number of different technology pathways, which have to be chosen among, a number of different feedstocks, all of which have to be evaluated for their own sustainability. But we are committed to that. We've declared to the world that by 2030, all Boeing airplanes, those that are already in use and in service, those that are to be developed and produced and delivered, all will be able to fly on 100% sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, as we call it. So that's a big commitment for us, and we're spending time right now really working with oil and gas companies, with distributors, with technology companies, and others in this environment and in our industry to figure out how we scale up sustainable aviation fuel so it can play its full role over time. And then fourthly, there is the disruptive technologies. And so we talk about things like open rotor concepts for propulsion. We talk about radical changes to the aerostructure, truss wings, which you can imagine high wings with trusses that come into the fuselage, which can also change the emissions fuel burn of an airline. So those 4 pillars, the starting point being fleet renewal and what we do with our airplane through continuous innovation, the second point being infrastructure, the third point being SAF, and the fourth point being the horizon of technology. That's really how we think about it. We're very committed. It's a big undertaking for us.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those things that we at P&G are really diving into on sustainability. And your point is it is more than just the specific product or what goes into it. It's the whole supply chain. It's for P&G, it's a big part of the emissions for our products are actually in use. So if you can design things like Tide cold water which washes laundry in cold water, you actually reduce 90% of the emissions because most of the emissions come from heating the water. So, you find these opportunities in places you wouldn't think about, like the step-down approach you described in the air traffic control. So, Marc, you mentioned earlier another one of the crises that you had and that you learned from, which was the 737 MAX. And I know that's every company has challenges, and I wonder if you could just share anything you learned from that, and anything that you think that would be useful for the people who are watching this in terms of how you all faced and, by the way, successfully came out of that.
Well, Mark, it was a profoundly difficult time. 346 souls were on board, and it marks our company in a really direct and personal way. Those accidents took their precious lives from loved ones, and that's something that is never going to be lost or forgotten across this team. But I'll tell you, when I think about lessons learned, and I suspect it's probably different in some ways for everybody across the organization, but one thing that was really stuck with me came from a book written by a gentleman by the name of David Friedman. The book's name was Range. And he describes in the book in one section the difficulty that we can all have in learning to drop our tools. And what that means is that there are times where the most logical thing in the world is to recognize that our tool isn't the right tool at that moment for that job. But it's really hard for all of us because the thing that is our tool that we're really good at is the thing we lean into. One of the really one of the mistakes in the MAX development was an assumption. It was a fundamental certification assumption. It was an assumption that all of industry and all the regulators held to and believed firmly to be a right assumption, but it proved to be a wrong assumption. And it was very difficult for us in the moment of trying to analyze and understand what had happened in those accidents to evaluate that assumption. Because it was such a deeply held part of our toolkit. And so, I took David's counsel, really powerfully when I put our experience and that the thought-provoking writing he did on that point together. I think all of us need to be able to examine the tools we lean into and make sure that they don't ultimately constrain us.
Sometimes drop the tools. That's part of what constructive disruption is about. Take a look at a different way of thinking about that. So, hey, a couple other questions, if you don't mind, as we wrap up. One, I'm just interested as you think about the aerospace industry is, we're starting to see some space travel, and I'm curious as to, it's fairly nascent, obviously, but I'm just curious as to how is Boeing thinking about that at all, or what is your view on what's going on, and what does the future look like?
Isn't it great? It's an exciting time. We remain the nation's largest provider of space services. So the International Space Station, the Boeing is contractor for. The Space Launch System, which will be the largest rocket in global history and will be the rocket that reopens access to the moon and the lunar surface for the United States, is a product that we are the contractor for. Commercial Crew is one of two space systems that NASA is currently contracting to send astronauts, humans, back into space. And we actually have a Commercial Crew launch that is scheduled just in the weeks ahead that we're excited about. And of course, we have a very big and robust satellite business that provides the U.S. government with satellites and also commercial customers with satellites. And we have a launch business, United Launch Alliance, a joint venture with another one of our aerospace and defense companies in the industry. So we play in space in a lot of ways. We're really excited about the enthusiasm and the presence and the investment, the capitalization that a lot of the new companies and some of the leading men of our technology stage have brought to this space. So I think it's good for all of us that the attention of the whole global community is coming back into space. We get now a lot of phone calls from our partner governments around the world who are interested in seeing what they can also do to enter some of this high energy moment around space. And I think this is one of those kind of watch us fly. There's going to be an awful lot of activity in the next year or two, and we fully intend to be right there in the center of it.
Oh, that's exciting. Thanks for sharing that, Marc. When I grew up, I was very much into into rockets, and I was 9 years old when we landed on the moon, and still remember exactly where I was and how exciting that time was. So I'm excited to watch Boeing fly. And speaking of flying, why don't maybe to close out with, tell us a little bit about your recent trip across the United States. It's not space travel, but it was in a Cessna, if I understand right.
Well, one of my dreams since I was a little boy was to get my private pilot license, and I was 48 years delinquent, but I finally did get it this past October, and it's been a real treat. And a buddy of mine was doing this bucket list trip of flying a Cessna 182 turbo all across the country. So I met him in Long Beach for the return flight from Long Beach to Washington, D.C., and it was just brilliant. We flew out of Long Beach, John Wayne Airport, flew over the San Bernardino Mountains, took a stop in Arizona for some fuel. From there, jumped over the Rockies into Pueblo, Colorado for some more fuel, continued on to Kansas, dodged some storms, spent the night by Manhattan, Kansas, and then cut our way home through storms all the next day. 15 hours of flying, but a real joy. Seeing our country from above gives you an appreciation for the diversity of who we are. Our ground and our mountains and our sky are as diverse as our people. And it was just a great reminder of why we should all be so proud in the United States in terms of what we have, but also globally, because it just reminds us this is a big world, and air travel can connect us in ways around the world that we otherwise couldn't be connected.
Wow, that's awesome, and thanks for sharing a little bit of a view of that. So, Marc, thank you so much for the time today. Thank you for your leadership at Boeing and for your participation on P&G's board. It was a pleasure talking with you, and we will continue to watch Boeing and watch you fly.
Marc, thank you for having me. It's really great to be here at Signal, and I wish you the best as you round third and head for home in this really important 2 days together. So,
Great.
Well done.
Great, thank you. John, back to you.
Thank you, Marc. And Marc, that was a great conversation. I love the idea. The concept's going to stick with me of dropping your tools. And the honesty of what you learn in a crisis and how you can get better through it, the opportunity of it.